Imagine a walled garden, quiet beneath a pale morning sky. The stones of the castle still hold the chill of night, and mist clings to the grass where footsteps have not yet fallen. Somewhere, faintly, a bell rings, the signal for morning prayers. But within these walls, the rhythm is slower. The gardener kneels among the dew, hands deep in the earth, pulling a stray weed from the base of a herb bed. The day begins as it has for years, one quiet task leading to another. Tonight, we drift into the world of the medieval gardeners, the quiet caretakers of beauty and sustenance, who worked in the shadows of great stone castles. Their days passed among herbs and fruit trees, roses and vines, the hum of bees and the soft murmur of running water from a fountain or a small stream. For every lord or lady who strolled the gardens, there were many hands tending, pruning, and planting in silence. The gardens of the Middle Ages were places of peace, devotion, and design, part sanctuary, part larder, and part symbol of divine order. They reflected the world as it was imagined to be, enclosed, patterned, and shaped by human care. And yet within those quiet walls, the rhythm of life was profoundly natural, bound not to politics or conquest, but to seasons, soil, and sunlight. So, settle in. Let the pace of the past slow your thoughts. Imagine the faint scent of time in the air, the sound of distant footsteps on gravel, the soft creak of a wooden gate. This is the story of the gardeners of medieval castles, their labor, their quiet knowledge, and the living worlds they built within walls of stone. At dawn, when the castle still slept, the gardeners were already at work. They moved through shaded courtyards and along narrow paths bordered by low stone walls. Their tools were simple: wooden-handled spades, pruning knives, watering pots made of bronze or clay. The air in the early morning was cool and damp, thick with the scent of crushed leaves and freshly turned soil. The walled garden, or hortus conclusus, was both functional and symbolic, a space designed for order amid the chaos of the wider world. Within its boundaries, plants were grouped by purpose. Near the center stood the herb garden, sage, rosemary, and lavender, used for both medicine and cooking. Along one edge, fruit trees leaned against the warm stone apples. Pears and quince, carefully trained to grow flat against the wall in the espalier style. Elsewhere, there were flowers planted, not for decoration, but for meaning. The rose, sacred to the Virgin Mary, climbed up trellises. The lily stood for purity. Even the humblest plants, mint, marjoram, chamomile, were believed to hold symbolic or healing power. As the sun rose, the castle stirred to life. Servants carried water, cooks visited to gather herbs, and the distant ring of hammers or the clatter of armor drifted from the courtyard. Yet in the garden, the pace remained unhurried. Tasks were repetitive but precise: trimming dead petals, sweeping fallen leaves, winding vines along wooden supports. The gardeners spoke little as they worked. Their world was made of small sounds: the scrape of metal on stone, the hum of bees in clover, the soft brush of a broom over the path. To them, time was not measured by hours, but by the turning of the seasons: planting in spring, tending in summer, harvesting in autumn, mending walls and resting soil through the winter. Bees were vital companions. Many castles kept hives, and the gardeners tended them carefully. Wax was precious for candles, honey for food and medicine. In every movement, there was quiet skill: when to water, when to prune, how to graft one branch to another. These were crafts passed down from master to apprentice, not written in books but learned through touch and repetition. As evening came, shadows lengthened across the garden walls. The gardeners gathered tools, stacked them neatly by the shed, and rinsed their hands in the cool water of the trough. When night fell and the castle windows glowed with torchlight, the garden grew still again, save for the rustle of leaves and the whisper of wind through the vines. Day after day, season after season, their work continued, steady, patient, unseen. A quiet devotion, offered not to crown or coin, but to the earth itself. If we follow the thread of history from these quiet castle courtyards outward, we come to one of the most ambitious undertakings of medieval horticulture, the creation of the royal gardens at Westminster. Long before London grew into the restless city we know today, the site of Westminster Abbey and Palace stood surrounded by open fields, streams, and small plots of land. Around the 11th century, monks began tending gardens there, cultivating herbs for healing and vegetables for the abbey kitchens. In time, the royal household expanded nearby, and with it, a series of gardens, both practical and ornamental, were laid out beside the Thames. Imagine the air by the river, cool, heavy with mist, the soft clatter of oars from a passing boat. Along the bank, men dig narrow channels to draw fresh water into the gardens. The soil, rich from the river's silt, turns easily beneath their spades. Slowly, the royal gardens take form. Squares of raised earth, divided by gravel paths, each bordered with short hedges of boxwood. Records from the period mention walled gardens, planted with roses, violets, gilliflowers, and lilies. Fruit trees were trained against the sunlit walls, figs, cherries, and apples, while arbors of woven willow created shaded walks for noble visitors. Closer to the palace, fountains trickled over carved stone basins, and fish ponds glimmered beneath the branches. Every detail was deliberate. The royal garden was more than a retreat, it was a living symbol of order and divine favor. Within those enclosed walls, nature was arranged to reflect the hierarchy of the heavens, each bed, each plant in its proper place. The gardeners who worked there were chosen for their skill. Some came from monasteries, where the cultivation of plants had been refined for centuries. Others were trained in the new techniques arriving from the continent, irrigation systems from Italy, grafting methods from France. Together, they blended artistry and practicality, creating a landscape that mirrored the quiet discipline of their craft. Even kings took pride in their gardens. Henry III, for instance, was known to order seeds, saplings, and rose plants from as far as France for Westminster. Under his reign, the garden became both a sanctuary and a stage, a space for contemplation, but also a backdrop for royal display. Yet for those who tended it daily, the garden's grandeur mattered little. Their focus remained on the rhythm of maintenance, pruning, watering, protecting plants from frost or pests. When storms swept in from the Thames, they worked swiftly to drain flooded beds. In harsh winters, they covered the more delicate roots with straw and cloth. When we imagine those early royal gardens, it's easy to think of splendor. But beneath that beauty lay unending care, hands calloused from work, backs bent over rows of herbs, boots caked with mud from the river's edge. The beauty of Westminster's gardens was, in truth, born of quiet endurance, and as the centuries passed, those gardens changed. Some were lost to expansion, others buried beneath stone. Yet the concept of the enclosed garden, a measured paradise within walls, endured, finding echoes in every estate and monastery across England. From these royal plots, we move now to what lies beneath them. Traces left behind, silent and buried, waiting centuries to be seen again. Archaeologists have long known that the earth beneath castles and abbeys holds quiet memories. Beneath the flagstones of old courtyards or deep below the streets of modern towns lie the faint outlines of medieval gardens, invisible from above, yet recorded in the soil itself. At some castle sites, careful excavation has revealed patterns where garden paths once ran, pale lines of gravel against darker earth. Seeds, pollen, and roots preserved by damp soil tell what once grew there, thyme and rue, fennel and sage, the unmistakable signature of rosemary. Sometimes, these remnants are found unexpectedly. Beneath Westminster, fragments of wooden fences, clay plant pots, and shards of watering vessels have surfaced, their surfaces faintly marked by time. Each small discovery adds to the quiet picture of hands tending, of soil turned, of lives devoted to careful cultivation. In monasteries, traces of physic gardens have been uncovered, where medicinal herbs once flourished. Monks kept careful records of what they planted, noting which herbs cured fever, eased pain, or calmed the spirit. Even after centuries underground, the arrangement of those gardens can be traced, neat squares and circles, divided by pathways of compacted clay. One of the more surprising discoveries came from an excavation near Canterbury. Beneath what was once a cloister, archaeologists found layers of pollen and root fragments belonging to roses, lavender, and even exotic plants like saffron crocus, suggesting that these gardens were not merely practical, but aesthetic, places of reflection and color. The soil preserves soundless echoes of those spaces, the faint imprint of steps where gardeners once walked, the compacted earth where benches might have stood. And then sometimes there are the seeds themselves. Tiny, nearly weightless, yet resilient beyond measure. Seeds from the Middle Ages, pressed between layers of soil, have been germinated in modern laboratories, their life suspended, then gently awakened. In their fragile growth, a window opens into a world long gone, a sprig of medieval time, a blossom of long-forgotten marigold. These quiet discoveries remind us that history does not only rest in stone or parchment, it lingers in the humblest of things, in roots, in dust, in the faint perfume of a flower that last bloomed 700 years ago. And while the grand gardens of kings have faded, their spirit, the human impulse to cultivate, too, nurture beauty from the soil endures even in these faint traces of green beneath the earth. Inside the garden walls, time seemed to move differently. The gardener's world was measured by the growth of plants, by the slow unfolding of leaves, by the soft transitions of light across the day. Beyond the walls, however, life was rarely still. Castles were places of command, filled with noise, orders, and the shifting currents of power. Horses clattered through courtyards, messengers rode in haste, guards shouted from battlements. From the garden, these sounds reached the ear faintly, like distant waves breaking against a shore. The gardener knew both worlds, the ordered peace within and the turmoil without. While nobles discussed alliances or taxes, he knelt by a rose bush, pruning away a single dead bloom. While soldiers trained in the yard, he adjusted a trellis so the vines would grow straighter. It was in its way a kind of quiet resistance to tend what could be tended, it a care for what grew, regardless of what changed beyond the walls. For the monks, the garden was a place of prayer, each act of cultivation, a gesture of devotion. For castle gardeners, it was a craft, but also a sanctuary. The flowers and herbs they planted softened the stone of war and wealth, and for a few hours each day, gave order to a world often ruled by chance. When the great halls filled with feasts and noise, the garden held its peace. Even when fire or siege came to a castle, when towers fell and gates splintered, it was often the garden that quietly endured, its roots hidden deep, waiting for the season to turn again. So it was then, and so it is now. The stillness of green life beside the noise of human ambition. The gardeners of medieval castles left no grand monuments, no inscriptions carved in stone. Their legacy lies instead in the idea of care, that even in the shadow of towers, one could find meaning in tending a single rose and watering a small patch of earth. As the night deepens, imagine once more the enclosed garden beneath the stars. The castle windows are dark now, the torch is extinguished. Air carries the scent of damp leaves and lavender. Somewhere a bee stirs in its hive, then settles again. The gardener sleeps in a small room nearby, his hands rough but steady, his thoughts perhaps still in the rows of plants he will tend tomorrow. Time has swept away the castles, the kings, and the wars, but the rhythm of his work remains. It continues in every quiet act of care, in every garden where someone bends to the earth and listens, for a moment, to the sound of growing things. So rest now, as the medieval gardeners once did, surrounded by the quiet breath of nature, steady, peaceful, and timeless.